Right. Charles idolised Isabella, and his hypochondria deepened after her death over the 5 years before her daughter was begun. Titian set a scenario of grief, and he did this both aesthetically and intellectually. The dark reddish tan of her overgarment had to indicate grief mixed with comfort, as prescribed by this guy. Where it was tinged with more warmth and redness, it signified too furious grief. And as it fell against black, it stood for the greatest sorrow in the world. Her head surmounted by black indicated thoughts of death. The ashen grey of the book was an emblem of reflection and thoughts of death. The portrait also had to remind Charles of the reality of past love and devotion. The golden yellow of the girdle, such as Isabella wore, meant delight in beautiful love between a lady and her loved one. Where the tan-coloured garment is seen against the green of the landscape outside the window, this combination of colour symbolised laughter and tears. The window, in fact, with its vista of sky and landscape of yellow, gold, blue and grey and black, signified hope of enjoying love in sadness. Where the violet curtain is draped behind Isabella's head and grades into tan, this signified loyalty and comfort in suffering. The violet flesh colour and white, as at her head, prayed for loyalty towards women. And the gold, as of her bodice, was a sign of the preciousness, as of the bride of Christ, which is the church militant. And above all, the principal stone in her jewelled pendant, the emerald, represented love and joy and perpetuity, whilst below it an enormous ruby signified ardent spiritual passion, and her great pendant pearl with swathes of smaller pearls everywhere sewn into her embroidery stood for joy and chastity. Isabella's diadem pendant brought the colour wisdom of the painting to a focus and was franked with chrysolite, a stone that in itself was a symbol of wisdom, as well as magnanimity and richness. It's no wonder, well, we won't worry about what Aretino had to say. Charles will, no doubt, have shared the common belief of the time that artists and the insane had often direct access to God, and that a painter such as Titian could breathe pneuma into a picture. Every nuance of the painting will have been understood by Charles, especially the meanings for him personally of each emblem. The painting's overall grand simplicity will have conjured up a majesty that went beyond the aesthetics of mood and temperament and catalogues of its emblematic trivia. He will have appreciated that it had something of musical quality, as of the piercing sadness of the Greek Lydian mode of music, a mode of painful lamentation. Its air of nostalgia and melancholy enchantment was all that Charles had hoped for. When he retired to his house by the monastery at Yuste in 1556, he took few possessions with him, but especially this picture of Isabella, and he would sit contemplating it as if in a trance. On his deathbed, he had this church portrait propped up in front of him.
It would have played a different role for us, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Ability for people to stomach strong paintings that they won't.
They have an educated public, we don't have. Symbolism of any kind relies on shared meanings. It's possible for an artist to develop the meaning of symbols. For example, in Guernica, Picasso has the flame of hope reduced to a light bulb. Clever, powerful and evocative. Symbols exist in a context of socially or culturally shared meanings, and it's the job of the art historian to renew our understanding by an archaeological uncovering of the context which has been lost over time. This can be revelatory. However, art history's symbol is not art criticism's metaphor. When all metaphors are equally valid, the critic can apply any metaphor that allows whatever interpretation is required. I contend it's not valid to invest artworks with new meanings by applying a convenient extended metaphor. If the context exists only in the mind of the art critic, is alienated from the reaction of other viewers, was never part of the artist's original intention, and absent from the formal properties of the work itself, that may be clever, but unfortunately, while it reveals the critic, it conceals the art. And I plead not guilty.
Why? Excellent. I was wondering what you thought of like the symbolists. So you can get up to the symbolists. Synesthesia.
No.
I
thought I'd covered enough territory.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, you know, the 19th century,
No. As I was writing the piece, I was thinking, hang on a minute, there's some somebody's going to pull me up on my definitions of symbol and what they are and what you know. It's not a type of argument people are giving, just off the top of my head, really.
Oh, special. Really well researched.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say congratulations. Really interesting talk, Brian. I can't help but make one very simple and light-hearted observation. I've noticed that whenever I go into a difficult situation, and this will be with other people I'm going to, we seem to wear red. And you're wearing red tonight.
I didn't thought that.
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
Don't think about it consciously, but one wears the colour of power.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff that we went through is still there.
Yeah, I agree.
Almost
Subliminally.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is not there. There's a lot of artists, I think, these days who try to make symbols in their art. And I think you're saying quite rightly that you can't just make up symbols.
Yeah, I think
they have to be understood generally by the community.
When artists make up what they call their own symbols, I think they're inventing science, which is fine.
Yeah.
But they're not symbols.
But at the same time, there are still symbols. I mean, pearls for me are always a symbol. I would never wear them to a wedding.
Right. But couldn't the sign become a symbol to help people accept it?
What
if it's a striking sign that for some reason people at the time think is significant, but not what the sign's significant.
Just reminded me of, I was thinking of an example, I was talking to my daughter about it this morning at breakfast. There's a billboard in Melbourne, and when I was living down there, and it's got these guys in overalls, and the ad said, our overalls do not come in fuchsia, avocado or cinnamon. They come in man colour. That's the Robusta in Florida thing.
I really enjoyed it, Brian, and I think, just to have a look at the very roots of pigments and the way pigments are used, what it reveals is that nothing has changed very much in terms of the actual limitations that we have to work within as artists. The pigments that we use, the sort of layering that is required to achieve certain results. So much remains as it always was, and the gravitas of the earth pigments is one element, the sort of anchoring effect that they often have on a composition. So even as you expand your pigments and you move to, shall we say, a prismatic range, your earth pigments are still your solid anchor. And if you're building up a painting by layering, that interchange between the red ground and the overpainting with blues, or yellow and red, the three factors, red, yellow and blue, as Turner always saw as a necessary intersection for prismatic colour anyway. So as you advance into an Impressionist palette, or you look at a Turner palette, it's still grounded in that ancient and indigenous history of the importance of the fundamental earths. And I think that's what's so really interesting about your talk.
After meeting Lanspressa and being introduced to Florentine art and the earth pigments and all this sort of stuff, right? And then going off to Arnhem and discovering that these guys were using the same bloody pigments. I mean, I should have expected it, but I didn't. I thought, well, how can, suddenly I began to see that yellow ochre was not yellow ochre. There was lots of different yellow ochres and lots of different red ochres, and that sharpened my eye to colour in extraordinary ways.
Just to take it on a slightly different tack, I'm not making any comment or anything, just raising this question as to whether you thought more about this whole thing of refining the pastel colours to look feminine and the weak, making my hackles rise slightly. And I suppose it ties in with things that I thought about and written about over the years to do with the subject matter being feminine and the word weakness being implied, and other subject matter being strong and therefore masculine. I'm not saying anything, I'm just really raising it as an interesting point that came up in your talk.
I think it's an interesting point. And the Greeks did not consider women to be weak. I mean, the Bacchantes rode over the hills in the middle of the night in their drunken stupor, and if they came across a man, they'd tear him to pieces. They weren't weak, just irrational.
Hey, we've got to get together, girl.
I mean, even think of Julia Gillard. She wore red blazers, navy blazers. You never saw her in a tassel.
And she kept dyeing her hair even redder.
That's right.
Or her husband did.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on colour in architecture? You mentioned sculpture with Greece, like the Son of the Ring as well, was green and white.
Yeah, I've read somewhere that the Parthenon was supposed to be all brightly painted with blues and reds and yellows.
Yeah, it was actually the sort of thing I'm telling you about the other night.
I think Cathedral of Siena.
Like the
black and
original
white.
colour
Well,
was.
they didn't have any other colour and light shades, did they?
No.
It would have looked extraordinary.
But still, just let's go back to the feminine and weakness. Sorry, I want to stick around this one. I'd like it to be explored a little bit more in the conversation, because I think the side my hackles, it's a really interesting point as to how this developed, and does it really mean lack of strength?
I read no clear explanation of how that occurred.
Can I get
It just
something?
seems to have happened.
I guess that psychologically, it wasn't psychology wasn't developed at the time. So women generally tend to show their if they get sad, they show it. But that's not a weakness. It's even being strong, because they can go through that sad period and then go out.
That may be true.
Generally, I think at that time that this sort of thing became labeled as a weakness for women and as a strength for men. Whereas now that we know psychology better, we know psychologists recommend people to go and accept their weaknesses and face with it.
Can I make just one point?
Yeah.
It's considered in our society today to pretty much be considered a weakness if you admit to certain frailties of psychology, like depression or anxiety. And most people like to keep it quiet.
Yeah, well, but
It
that's
makes up.
still very traditional. It's old-fashioned, this sort of thought. Like, if someone knows about psychology, they don't.
It's totally economic, because the man in history, up to a long period of time, can survive without the woman, right? Because he has some useful skill. Whereas the woman was economically weak. She wasn't involved in financial decision making, and her role was to accept, looking after the house or what have you.
And just for children.
Children and needlework.
Just raising the future leaders of the
A
country.
lot of the time, the same mindset in those times was just to have children so you had free labour. That's why they wanted to have kids. They didn't have to pay people to come and till their fields. So they didn't care much for their kids.
I think you're right, and I think that persists into our very recent history. You know, I grew up in a farming community. You needed 5 children, you needed them mostly to be boys.
Yeah.
To take off the farm.
I want to ask Brian a question. You know, the colour silver, the colour grey, the colour brown grey, and the colour black, and the variations.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about what those symbolise?
Didn't ring a bell at all. Nothing. In all reading I did.
Because if you look at the cars that are driving around, you've got Range Rovers. They're all grey-brown, right? The colour codes, if you walk into Toyota, white, silver, grey, grey, green, and brown.
Well,
and black.
those car manufacturers spend
20
millions
years
on those
ago.
research.
20 years ago, you could walk in and you could get a green one, a yellow one, a red one, all this sort of stuff.
Purple one?
You could get a purple one. Cortina used to come out.
Well, there's an argument. There's an
Can't
argument
get
that
purple in a party.
that I've read at one stage that when you look at children, they're always drawn to strong colours, as are we all, I think. But the reality is that it's a strong colour within a context that's relatively neutral. And I think most of the time in paintings where a colour is successful, colours are relatively neutral with smaller areas of colour against that, and it's the neutrality that makes the colour appear strong. So as people grow up, rather than wanting to wear bright blue pants and bright red jumper and bright yellow hat, they decide to wear neutrals plus one bright colour perhaps. So Kay is not wearing bright yellow pants with her bright red jumper, right? So she's choosing one colour plus a neutral. And I would think that's the same thing, is that people are looking at the car colour, because the car is this sort of status symbol. It's something which is, they are showing their taste by not having a very strident colour for that thing.
Could you also say that it's might be a result of heavy socialisation? If you've got enough money to buy a $250,000 Range Rover, then dude, you don't have much, you're just going through, you're a lawyer or something, you're just going through the motions, you'd be completely socially conditioned.
I think it also depends on the association with your status, your job perhaps, or the use of the car. Lamborghinis, Porsches, they tend to be red.
Yeah.
Speed,
Yeah.
virility.
Really.
Things that are considered more sober and serious, responsible, respectful, the silver, grey colours that, black, they tend to be more like
But not
tuxedo suits.
Not pastel.
Yeah,
pastel.
Scott reminded me of an obvious fact that is often forgotten, saying that the brightest colours should be in smaller areas and set off by neutrals, whatever. The earth colours are cheap. All these guys were businessmen. They used the smallest amount of the brightest colours, but they were expensive. So you didn't put them all over.
Actually, that's a question I had for you, Brian. The whole thing about the earth colours, those red, yellow, black and white, when you were talking about that and the importance of them, the thing that occurred to me was, isn't that because they're readily available?
Yeah.
Because you can't get blues and things like that.
Yeah, they're also less fugitive. They are long-lasting, and that's still important in colour, and that is solidity in the painting.
Sure, but I mean, what I'm asking about is the historical origin of these things, and I'm wondering.
No doubt. The owners are available everywhere.
Yeah.
I've just come back to one other thing you were saying though, which really interested me, was you're drawing colour symbolism back to the guts of our life. Blood, death, life, all those things. And those colours exist in the earth, you were saying, they're, inhumane and easily attainable. I was really interested in that connection, which I've never thought about before at all. So
I've never thought about the medical connection where, the jaundice and the yellow and the bile. And, that was,
I think
when you read it, you know that you kind of know it. But
Just in the language, jaundice.
green with any
How primary colours are seen for men and the softer, more pastel colours are seen for women. I'm wondering if, how the yellow, jaundice, blood, etc., having to do with the actual colour of the skin, in accordance with what you were saying, how women were seen, their softer colours, they were possibly seen more vulnerable because they express their emotions more. I wonder if through that, their skin colour, as you know, when people get emotional, that blushes pink and white.
And goes through fashion.
And then maybe were more colour tan because they were out more, whereas women it was seen as beauty to be white. So they have lead in their makeup and things like that.
One of my favourite photographs is I never was a banks that come to mind, the Constitution. I met her on the banks of the Condamine. Her delicate constitution was not equal unto mine.
Who was she, Brian?
I don't want to start World War III, but I consider women's liberation movement to be a technological artifact.
Artifact.
A technological artifact.
Right.
Birth
That's
control.
another paper you're going to have to get.
Birth control.
I would just want to say this one more thing in response to everything you've said about colour. It's been extremely interesting. I went to see the Lloyd Rees exhibition on the weekend. We're all aware that he is a man, right? He so what? Most beautiful paintings in pastel colour, particularly in his later paintings. And I'm not drawing any conclusions except that in the light of what has been said about pastel colours and everything, what does this mean about
Well,
Lloyd?
it goes back to the Rococo as well, doesn't it?
Hey.
There's the Rococo, the yellow, the Apollonian yellow. You know, this beautiful daffodil with yellow.
No, they were starting to get new pigments too.
Yeah, and even gentlemen who wear pastel colours as a sign of status, the aristocratic status.
That's right. Beau Brummel was the one who
Yeah,
had the stroke of genius to underdress so that the women stood out.
But didn't pink used to be, didn't men used to wear pink?
Yeah, absolutely. They tried to outdo it.
The Spanish grandees and nobles and always featured blues.
They were more
Blues,
colourful than the
and
women.
reds and things.
They were more ornate than the women. So if you're talking about peacocks, they were the men, not the women.
No, that's what Beau Brummel did. But he was the first guy to figure out that underdressing made the girls look good. So they all wanted to see beside him.
But I want.
When you said that the earth colors were all coming from earth, but there are so many blues in Persian art.
Yeah,
Really,
Ah,
so
right,
much
okay,
blue.
yes, and the Maya had blue, the Egyptians had blue,
Yeah.
but it is nonetheless fairly red.
yeah.
That is lifelike.
It's blue, and it was very rare, wasn't it?
Well, it comes from, most of it comes from a cave in Afghanistan.
It was
Most of it still
light,
does.
Maybe that's where why there are a lot of blues, because of where you come from. Maybe it was more about blues, I don't know.
Around.
Yeah, there is some sort of stones there, fused and lagerite, which are two, like, lagerite is like ultramarine and fused is like light blue, very
Yeah, well,
beautiful
you've
blue.
got all the best blue in the world in the country next door to you, because it came from Afghanistan.
But I don't think you find too many blues in Australia, except in the rocks.
No.
Actually, your rocks are red marks, but like my grass.
I think
Well, yeah.
Well, we all talked out.